exceptional to be compelling. And so I assume that the court, by making that statement last week, or whenever it was, or last year, has indicated that it's permissible.
A young man's voice shakes on a 911 line. "Someone killed my parents." Beverly Hills officers step into a den lit by a television still humming. Jose and Mary Louise Kitty Menendez lie where the blasts ended them. Shotguns, close range, expended shells glitter on carpet like coins. Outside, the two sons hover in camera light and shock. The public hears grief. Prosecutors will later argue calculation. The house on Elm Drive becomes a fault line where privilege, trauma, and murder meet. Neighbors in one of America's wealthiest zip codes wake to news that shatters the illusion of safety money promises. They are Joseph Lyle Menendez and Erik Menendez. On the surface, two driven sons of a high-performing immigrant family. Tennis trophies, a Princeton dream, the insider's zip code. Privately, the defense will say they lived with fear, sexual abuse, and a father who ruled without mercy. Prosecutors will call it a fable to cover greed. Scope is narrow but seismic. Two parents dead on August 20th, 1989. A single night in a single home, and a case that will dominate the 1990s news cycle and reshape how America thinks about family violence and wealth. They are notorious because they sat in court not as loners or strangers, but as sons, sitting across from photographs of the people who raised them, fed them, and according to the state, left them millions of dollars in inheritance. They were born in New York and New Jersey in 1968 and 1970, children of a Cuban-born media executive, Jose, who climbed from poverty to boardrooms, and Kitty, a former schoolteacher who abandoned her career for motherhood. The family moved west for Jose's career advancement at Live Entertainment. The defense framed childhood as a closed world of power and control, punctured by allegations of sexual assault against Erik that began at age 6 and continued for years. Prosecutors denied the abuse occurred and emphasized no prior official findings, no hospital records, no reports to authorities. Early warning signs were not criminal. Pressure, expectation, and brittle perfection that looked like success from outside but felt like suffocation within. The path to crime tightened across 1989. Tension escalated. A formative moment arrived in the summer. Access to shotguns, practice at a shooting range in San Diego, and a decision made in whispers and fear or cold calculation, depending on which narrative you believe. Whether born of terror or calculation is the question that still divides audiences decades later. The crimes unfold in minutes on August 20th, 1989. Years active, 1989 only. Confirmed victim count, 2. The method is brutal and simple. 12-gauge shotguns purchased days earlier, buckshot tearing into the couch and bodies. Kitty struck multiple times as she tried to crawl away from her own sons. Pattern is not repetition. It is the choreography of a single event with an after-action plan that includes dumping shells on Mulholland Drive, changing clothes, hiding the weapons, and leaving to build an alibi at a movie theater showing Batman. They return around midnight and deliver the call that will be replayed for decades. The most disturbing aspect is the intimacy and the overkill. No serial predation, no stranger thrills. Two sons face their parents at close distance and pull triggers again and again. 15 shots total, reloading during the attack. Afterward comes spending that investigators will flag as suspicious. Rolex watches, a Porsche 911, courtside seats at Lakers games, restaurants, a business venture involving a chicken wing franchise. The state reads it as motive showing they killed for money. The defense calls it shock and self-soothing behavior from traumatized young men finally free from tyranny. They avoid capture, at first through silence and theater. A mafia-hit narrative floated in early statements, tears at the funeral, and performances convincing enough that investigators initially look elsewhere. Detectives track credit card trails, spending patterns, and contradictions in their stories. A key breakthrough arrives in a therapist's office months later, where Erik confesses to Dr. Jerome Oziel during a session. The therapist's girlfriend eventually alerts police after overhearing tapes. Legal challenges erupt over therapist-patient privilege, but tapes and testimony survive enough to matter. Arrest follows in March 1990 after the grand jury is briefed. Lyle arrested at the family mansion, Erik surrendering at Los Angeles International Airport upon returning from a tennis tournament. Reactions diverge. Erik weeps in interviews with Barbara Walters. Lyle presents contained control and calculated responses. Both insist fear drove them to kill, not greed. The court process defines the 1990s and becomes a cultural phenomenon. First trials in 1993 end in hung juries, split on intent. Some jurors believe the abuse claims and see manslaughter, others see cold-blooded murder. The retrial in 1995 is tightly controlled by Judge Stanley Weisberg. The judge constrains some categories of abuse testimony and media access is limited. The prosecution hammers on the spending, the lies, the purchase of weapons, the cleanup. Defense attorney Leslie Abramson fights for every inch, presenting the brothers as victims who snapped. Tapes of therapy sessions are pivotal evidence. The verdict comes in March 1996, first-degree murder with special circumstances. The sentence is life without parole for both brothers. The courtroom sees a spectacle, dueling narratives of terrorized children versus calculated parasites who wanted the estate and freedom. The jury chooses deliberation over pity, evidence over emotion. As of November 2025, Joseph Lyle Menendez and Erik Galen Menendez are serving life without parole in California prisons, reunited in the same facility after years of separation. Decades of appeals and media revisit their claims, but the judgments stand. Their cultural legacy is extensive. Television, dramatizations including Ryan Murphy's recent series, documentaries that re-examine evidence, TikTok movements advocating for their release, and the public still split on what to believe about what happened behind those doors. New evidence presented in recent years, a letter Erik allegedly wrote months before the murders describing the abuse, has sparked renewed legal motions, but courts have not granted relief. Were they monsters who murdered out of greed, or traumatized sons who chose the unforgivable? It is both simpler and harder. Abuse, if true, does not justify what followed. Greed, if decisive, does not erase what came before. What remains is a family destroyed by two trigger pulls and a country arguing over motive, masculinity, and what we believe about children who kill their parents. The camera flash fades. London neon rises.
Ronnie. Eventually, Fred would get to see parts of Broadmoor that no outsiders would ever see. He was once able to...
A judge's voice is dry and British. Society has earned a rest from your activities. The defendants stand identical as mirrors, suits sharp as razors, hair slicked back, faces that photographers made famous and prosecutors made infamous, nightclubs, celebrities, photographers, and fear. London in the 1960s belongs to charismatic twins who built an empire on violence and charm, who shook hands with movie stars while ordering executions in back rooms. Ronald Ronnie Cray and Reginald Reggie Cray sell glamour in the West End and control in the East End. They are public gentlemen and private tyrants, photographed with celebrities like Judy Garland and Barbara Windsor while running protection rackets that bleed businesses dry. The scope runs across the 1950s and 1960s. Extortion, intimidation, assault, arson, and at least 2 murders on which they are convicted. George Cornell, shot in a pub in front of witnesses, and Jack the Hat McVitie, stabbed in a suburban lounge. Some investigators believe the true count is higher, but proof is buried with the witnesses who saw too much. They are notorious because they fused crime with celebrity so tightly that witnesses felt as if they were testifying against the city itself, against the myth of the Cray mystique. They were born in London's East End on October 24, 1933, into wartime privation and neighborhood loyalty that valued silence over cooperation with police. Their mother Violet doted on them. Their father Charles was largely absent. Boxing taught them discipline, spectacle, and how to hurt people within rules before they learned to hurt people without them. Early signs arrive early. Assaults on rivals at age 16, petty rackets, control by intimidation. They dodged national service, went AWOL, and built reputations as untouchable. They opened clubs, first the Double R, then Esmeralda's Barn, finally the Kentucky Club, that became theaters for power where celebrities drank upstairs while violence simmered below. Ronnie's paranoid schizophrenia grows over time, exacerbated by drugs and alcohol. Later, he will be certified insane and moved to Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. But at the height, their bond is unbreakable. Their partnership is seamless. A formative moment, the public murder of George Cornell in the Blind Beggar pub on March 9, 1966. Ronnie walks in, shoots Cornell between the eyes at point-blank range, and walks out. It signals that the twins no longer believe they need shadows, that they are above the law. Years active stretch roughly from the early 1950s to their arrests in 1968. Confirmed murder count on conviction is 2, but the harm radiates across decades. The method is personal, punches that break jaws, pistols fired in crowded rooms, knives thrust repeatedly into bodies. The pattern blends hospitality up front with violence backstage. One moment hosting a party, the next torturing a debtor in a warehouse. Escalation looks like confidence, celebrating with actors and politicians like Lord Boothby, selling themselves as respectable businessmen while bodies disappear into the Thames. Notable victims: Cornell, a member of the rival Richardson gang shot for perceived disrespect. McVitie, a small-time crook and associate punished for failing to complete a contract killing and for mocking Ronnie. The killing of McVitie is particularly brutal, stabbed repeatedly by Reggie while Ronnie holds him, then the body disposed of, never recovered. The most horrifying aspect is normalization. Famous photographs mask an underworld where silence is bought by fear and proximity, where entire neighborhoods know what happens but say nothing because the Krays are one of their own. Scotland Yard's Leonard Nipper. Red leads the patient case, assembling evidence brick by brick. Surveillance, witness protection programs, and pressure build over months. Breakthroughs come when frightened insiders finally talk, when the myth cracks enough to let light in. On May 8, 1968, police execute coordinated dawn raids arresting the twins and dozens of associates. The twins are defiant, smiling for cameras. They have spent years rehearsing a myth, believing their own legend. Trials in 1969 strip it away to evidence, testimony from terrified witnesses finally willing to speak, and grim photographs that juries cannot unsee. The judge calls them what they are: dangerous criminals who terrorized London for profit and ego. The verdict is guilty of murder. The sentence is life with a minimum of 30 years, unprecedented at the time. Final fates diverge, but both end in captivity. Ronald Kray dies in Broadmoor Hospital on March 17, 1995, of a heart attack at age 61, still technically a prisoner. Reginald Kray is released on compassionate grounds on August 26, 2000, dying of bladder cancer just 5 weeks later on October 1, 2000. Their funerals are spectacles. Reggie's cortege through the East End draws thousands, a display of the myth that refuses to die. Their legacy is cinematic and complicated. Films like The Krays and Legend, biographies that romanticize or condemn, and a British memory where celebrity and cruelty sit at the same table. To some, they are folk heroes. To others, brutal thugs who got what they deserved. What binds these brothers? Power amplified by echo. If one twin wants control, the other removes doubt. Together they are more dangerous than the sum of their parts. Glamour was the mask, violence was the face. The camera turns from club lights to a finish line stained by smoke and blood.
he has lost his bid to remove the judge in his case. Tsarnaev was challenging Judge George O'Toole's impartiality because of comments O'Toole made.
A judge leans forward in a federal courtroom. When your name is mentioned, all that will be remembered is the evil you have done. The video that jurors saw is simple and damning. Two young men walking with backpacks along Boylston Street on April 15, 2013. They set the bags down near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. They leave. They do not run. They walk away calmly. Seconds later, the first bomb tears the crowd open. Then the second. The sound is caught on cameras from every angle. A blast, screams, smoke, and then the aftermath that defines a city. Dzhokhar Anzorovich Tsarnaev and Tamerlan Anzorovich Tsarnaev appear at first as students in diaspora, wrestling with identity, finding paths in America after their family flees conflict. Privately, one brother pulls the other toward an ideology that validates rage, gives purpose to alienation, transforms personal grievance into holy mission. Scope is wide and precise. 3 killed at the Boston Marathon finish line, 8-year-old Martin Richard, 29-year-old Crystal Campbell, 23-year-old Chinese graduate student Lingzi Liu, more than 260 injured by shrapnel designed to maim, then the murder of MIT police officer Sean Collier, age 26, shot in his patrol car during their flight. They are notorious because they targeted a civilian ritual, a celebration of endurance and community, and then tried to escape through a city, hunting them live on television while the world watched. Tamerlan is born in 1986 in the Soviet Union, Dzhokhar in 1993 in Kyrgyzstan. Their family moves across borders, Kyrgyzstan, Dagestan, the United States, chasing safety and opportunity. They arrive in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 2002. Tamerlan excels briefly as a boxer, dreams of representing the United States, but falls away from that path. Early signs collect around Tamerlan. Isolation from American culture, online extremist content, a growing interest in jihadist propaganda from Anwar al-Awlaki, and others. He travels to Dagestan in 2012 for 6 months, raising FBI interest but no charges. Dzhokhar seems more integrated, college student at UMass Dartmouth, friends, parties, marijuana, but investigators will later trace his digital footprint to the same radical materials. The path to crime is practical. Pressure cooker bombs constructed with instruction from Inspire magazine published by Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, BBs, nails, and ball bearings to maximize injury, a date and time chosen for maximum density of civilians. A formative moment is caught on video. The calm of their walk through a festival that trusts itself, that sees 2 men with backpacks and thinks nothing of it until the world explodes. The crimes compress into 1 week, April 15th, 2013. 2 explosions near the finish line at 2:49 p.m., seconds and 1 block apart. The blasts kill 3 immediately and injure 260 others, 16 of whom lose limbs. April 18th, after the FBI releases surveillance images, the brothers murder MIT police officer Sean Collier in his patrol car, attempting to steal his service weapon to acquire more firepower. They carjack a Mercedes SUV, holding the driver hostage while forcing him to withdraw cash from ATMs. April 19th, a shootout erupts in Watertown, where Tamerlan dies after a firefight and being struck by the Mercedes driven by Dzhokhar as he flees. Dzhokhar escapes on foot, wounded. Later that evening, thermal imaging finds a body curled under a boat's top in a backyard on Franklin Street. Confirmed victim count is 4, the injured number in the hundreds, many with life-altering injuries. The method is simple in design, catastrophic in effect, shrapnel bombs placed at ground level where children watch. The most disturbing element is the ordinariness of the setting. Families cheering, children on shoulders holding signs, runners staggering into a final push after 26.2 miles. Evasion is partial. Once the FBI releases surveillance images on April 18th, the city itself becomes the net. Residents ordered to shelter in place while a manhunt unfolds. Evidence builds fast. Shattered pressure cookers recovered from the scene. BBs and ball bearings matching those sold at a local store, fusing components, residue from the scene matched to items found in searches of their apartment, the carjacking victim's testimony placing both brothers together, and crucially, the note Jokar writes on the boat's interior siding, citing motive, faith, and justification for targeting Americans. The US government is killing our innocent civilians, he writes. I can't stand to see such evil go unpunished. We Muslims are one body. You hurt one, you hurt us all. The arrest is on April 19, 2013, after negotiations fail, and he is pulled from the boat barely conscious. The reaction is blood loss, throat wounds preventing speech, and a hospital bed under armed guard, then a federal indictment with 30 counts, including using a weapon of mass destruction, resulting in death. Trial begins in January 2015 in federal court. Survivors testify about lost limbs, trauma, lives shattered. Forensic experts trace the chain from purchase to blast. The defense, led by Judy Clark, who has defended other notorious killers, concedes many acts but argues Tamerlan's dominance should spare Jokar's life, portraying him as a younger brother under the sway of a charismatic older sibling, radicalized and determined. Prosecutors present digital evidence showing both brothers committed to the act. The jury weighs suffering and intent for weeks. Guilty on every count on April 8, 2015. The penalty phase follows, a death sentence on May 15, 2015, making Jokar one of the youngest people sentenced to federal death row. Appeals follow for years. In 2020, the First Circuit Court of Appeals vacates the death sentence on procedural grounds related to jury selection. In 2022, the US Supreme Court reinstates the death sentence in a 6-3 decision. As of November 2025, Jokar Tsarnaev remains under federal death sentence at ADX Florence Supermax Prison in Colorado. Appeals continue, but options narrow. The cultural legacy includes new security protocols at public events, trauma that lingers in Boston, and a reminder that kinship can be a force multiplier for harm. Was this ideology draped over personal grievance, or conviction that found a container in extremism? The answer matters less than the fact that one brother followed another to a place where applause turned to screams, where an 8-year-old boy died standing next to his family. The next chapter leaves ideology and enters a house in Richmond where 3 brothers choose a city as a stage and terror as their script. A local anchor's voice trembles slightly, one of the most vicious murder sprees in Virginia history. The Briley family name becomes a warning whispered in Richmond neighborhoods. The spree of 1979 leaves households broken and a community locked in fear. Linwood Earl Briley, James Dyrrell Briley, and Anthony Ray Briley operate at night when doors are locked but not strong enough. Doors are thin, routines are maps they study. A 4th participant, a teenager named Duncan Eric Meekins, will turn state's evidence and narrate the pattern from the inside, providing testimony that makes convictions possible. They present as neighborhood figures, known but not feared until too late. The private reality is calculated intimidation wrapped in family loyalty. Scope is broad for such a short period. At least 11 victims across Richmond between March and October 1979. Home invasions, rape, murder, and arson. They are notorious not only for the brutality compressed into months, but also for what comes later. The 1984 death row escape from Mecklenburg Correctional Center that turns them from local horror into national headline, the largest death row escape in US history. The brothers are born in the 1950s in Richmond, Linwood in 1954, James in 1956, Anthony in 1958. Early stories include cruelty to animals documented by neighbors, an insular pecking order at home where Linwood dominates and the others follow. Warning signs emerge as robberies, assaults, intimidation of witnesses, then a sudden acceleration into lethal territory in March 1979. The path to crimes is opportunity mixed with thrill. empty sidewalks, houses with lights on suggesting occupants at home, a sense that nobody can stop them even when suspicions grow. A key moment is the first home invasion that escalates beyond robbery to sexual assault and homicide. A template forms that they will follow with variations for months. The spree's timeframe is March through October 1979. Confirmed victim count reaches at least 11, though investigations suggest the number may be higher. Victims include 76-year-old Mary Wilfong, killed in her home, elderly couple William and Virginia Booker, shot during a robbery, disc jockey Johnny G. Gallagher and his wife Judy Barton, murdered in their home, Harvey Wilkerson and his family, including 5 members ranging from adults to children, and others. Methods include binding victims with electrical cords, beatings, shootings at close range, and setting fires to destroy evidence. Victims are chosen for vulnerability and accessibility. The pattern shows escalation and experimentation. What begins as armed robbery becomes sexual assault, becomes murder, becomes arson. The most disturbing element is the collective sadism. 3 brothers reinforcing one another's impulses in confined spaces, each urging the others on or participating to prove loyalty. Duncan Meekins will testify to the dynamics, how refusal meant being cast out or becoming the next. Victim. Evasion is speed and fear. They strike, vanish into neighborhoods where they blend in, and return elsewhere before connections form. Investigators begin to map robberies to assaults to murders as the pattern becomes undeniable. Forensics help, ballistics matching, blood evidence, fibers. But the human hinge is Duncan Meekins, age 16, who pleads guilty to reduced charges and cooperates, providing detailed testimony about each crime. His cooperation breaks the case open. Arrests follow in October 1979 after a final crime goes wrong and witnesses survive to identify attackers. There is no remorse visible in public records or courtroom behavior. The trials in 1979-1980 are brutal for juries to sit through, hearing testimony about victims begging for mercy. Multiple capital sentences result for Linwood and James, life imprisonment for Anthony. Community members sit through testimony that redraws their memory of home, of neighborhoods they thought they knew. In May 1984, Linwood and James join 4 other death row inmates in a daring escape from Mecklenburg Correctional Center. They pose as guards, overpower officers, and flee. The escape lasts 19 days and becomes a national manhunt. Recapture comes in June 1984 in Philadelphia. The episode delays but does not stop justice. Linwood Earl Briley is executed on October 12, 1984 in Virginia's electric chair, age 30. His final words are brief. James Dyrrell Briley follows on April 18, 1985, also by electrocution, age 28. Anthony Ray Briley remains incarcerated as of November 2025, serving multiple life sentences. Their legacy is a case study in how group dynamics, especially among siblings with established hierarchies, can accelerate cruelty faster than any one person might travel alone. Were they products of a violent household, poverty, or systemic failure, or architects of their own appetite who chose victims and violence? On the scale of choice, trauma is context, not absolution. Another tight bond waits across the Atlantic in an upstairs room in France where 2 sisters create a horror that becomes legend.
And the sisters upstairs, calmly lying in bed together, still in their blood-stained clothes. Both confessed. Christine received life in prison.
A matron tries a key in a lock on Rue Bruyère. The door sticks. Officers force it open and step into a silence that feels planned, rehearsed. It is February 2nd, 1933, in Le Mans, a provincial French city. 2 domestic servants are not at their posts. 2 women lie upstairs in the master bedroom, unrecognizable in the aftermath of violence so extreme it will be photographed for evidence and haunt French consciousness for generations. 2 sisters crouch in a cramped upstairs room, fused in fear or zeal, depending on which academic or psychologist you read. Their hands are bloody. They make no attempt to flee. Christine Papin and Leah Papin live in a world of routine dictated to the minute, laundry folded precisely, meals served on schedule, steps creaking under their feet in the Lancelin household where they work as live-in maids. The public sees them as quiet, efficient, almost invisible in the way domestic servants were meant to be in 1930s France. The private bond is intense and closed, described by later analysts as folie à deux, a shared psychosis where one sister's delusions infect the other. Scope is focused. One house, one night, two victims, Madame Léonie Lancelin, age 37, and her adult daughter Geneviève, age 27. The case is notorious because it becomes a symbol onto which France projects class rage, psychiatric speculation, Marxist analysis, feminist theory, and a fascination with sisters who seem to move as one organism, indivisible in action and consequence. They are born in 1905 and 1911 to a poor family in Le Mans with documented instability. Their mother is described as domineering and unstable, their father largely absent. Childhood is institutional. Both sisters are placed in convent-run domestic training programs that prepare poor girls for service. Early signs are not violent. They are obedient, inward, efficient, praised by employers for their work. The path to crime is pressure rising unseen beneath the surface of routine. A formative moment may be an argument over a minor household task on the evening of February 2nd, 1933. An electrical short causes an iron to fail. Fear of punishment from Madame Lancelin escalates into confrontation. Accounts vary on precise triggers, but what happens next is documented in police records and photographs too disturbing for public display at the time. Year active, 1933, a single event. The method is blunt, personal, and shockingly brutal. A pewter pitcher used to beat, hammers, kitchen knives, and bare hands. Confirmed victim count, 2. Pattern is paroxysm rather than series, an explosion of violence compressed into minutes. After the initial attack that kills both women, the sisters gouge out the eyes of both victims and mutilate their bodies in ways that investigators will describe as unprecedented and that psychologists will analyze for decades. The eye removal particularly haunts, precise, deliberate, done to corpses in an act that suggests ritual or rage, beyond reason. There is no evasion attempt. The sisters retreat to a shared bedroom, wash themselves, lie down in a single bed together. When police arrive hours later and break down the locked door, they find the sisters naked, intertwined, waiting. They confess immediately and completely, showing no comprehension of having done wrong or any attempt to construct a defense. Investigators do not need weeks or complex forensics. They need light, an inventory, and the courage to document the scene. The arrest is immediate on February 2nd, 1933. Interrogation reveals a unity that both fascinates and frightens contemporary observers. Christine speaks and Leah nods, or Christine falls silent and Leah mirrors her mood. The dynamic is its own evidence of folie à deux. The trial moves quickly to September 1933 despite national attention. Psychiatric evaluations dominate proceedings. Multiple experts examine the sisters, diagnosing Christine with various conditions while finding Leah more passive. The defense argues temporary insanity, class oppression, driving servants to snap under tyrannical employers. The prosecution argues premeditated murder, pointing to the extent of mutilation, suggesting sustained rage. Christine Papin receives a death sentence commuted by the president to life imprisonment with hard labor. Leah Papin receives 10 years with hard labor, a lighter sentence reflecting her perceived role as follower rather than instigator. Christine Papin descends into severe mental illness in prison, paranoia, hallucinations, refusal to eat, self-harm. She is transferred to an asylum where she dies on May 18, 1937, age 32, of cachexia brought on by self-starvation and untreated mental illness. Leah Papin is released from prison in 1943 after serving her full sentence. She lives quietly under an assumed name, working as a chambermaid in a hotel in Nantes, shunning all contact with her past. She dies in 1982, Having lived nearly 4 decades in obscurity, the cultural legacy stretches long and wide. Jean Genet's play The Maids transforms them into revolutionary symbols. Films including Jean-Pierre Denis' Murderous Maids explore the psychology. Sociological essays by Simone de Beauvoir and others use the case as a prism to examine domestic labor, class warfare, and female rage. Were they victims of class cruelty who finally snapped under the weight of servitude and abuse, or abusers themselves who hid in plain sight until rage overwhelmed control? The record shows 2 bodies mutilated beyond recognition and 2 sisters who would not let go of each other's hands even when police tried to separate them for processing. The camera cuts across decades and an ocean to Kansas, where winter air burns in the lungs and headlights sweep across a soccer field about to become a crime scene.
Car on either
forward with such a hearing.
I don't think that I have jurisdiction to resentence Mr. Reginald Carr or Jonathan Carr.
A survivor's voice in a Kansas courtroom is steady despite what she describes. December 14th, 2000. He told us to get out of the car and run, she says, and then tells the jury what happened when they obeyed. Footprints in frost, muzzle flashes, bodies falling. The city of Wichita holds its breath and listens to a story of abduction, rape, torture, humiliation, and execution driven by 2 brothers who were not there to steal money, but to erase witnesses and humanity itself. Reginald Dexter Carr Jr. and Jonathan Dean Carr do not come with myths or carefully constructed public personas. No celebrity, no empire, no ideology. The public face is minimal. 2 men with criminal records, drifting, no fixed address or employment. Privately, the pattern is control, sexual violence, and murder escalating over 2 weeks. Scope is compact and catastrophic. 5 killings across linked episodes in December 2000, including the shooting deaths of 4 young adults execution style on a snow-covered soccer field, and the earlier murder of cellist and music teacher Linda Ann Walenta. They are notorious because one survivor, a young woman identified in court documents only as Holly G to protect her identity, tells the story with clarity and courage that leaves no room for ambiguity, providing testimony so detailed and harrowing that hardened investigators weep. They are born in the 1970s in Dodge City, Kansas, Reginald in 1973, Jonathan in 1976. Childhoods carry documented instability, broken homes, abuse allegations, petty crimes starting young. Early signs include robbery, drug offenses, assault escalating in severity, prison time that teaches nothing except bitterness. The path is escalation textbook, from petty to predatory to lethal. The formative decision that seals their fate is the choice to eliminate witnesses rather than simply flee with stolen cash and ATM cards. The decision that transforms robbery into massacre. The crimes are concentrated in December 2000 across Wichita. On December 11th, 55-year-old Ann Walenta, a cellist with the Wichita Symphony and beloved music teacher, is shot 3 times in her own car during an attempted carjacking in her driveway. She survives long enough to describe her attacker before dying on January 2nd, 2001. On December 14th and into the early hours of December 15th, the Carr brothers invade a home on Birchwood Drive where 5 young adults, Jason Befor, age 26, Bradley Haker, age 27, Aaron Sander, age 29, Heather Muller, age 25, and the survivor, age 25, are gathered. Confirmed murder count, 5. Method is systematic dehumanization, abduction at gunpoint in the victim's own home, forced ATM withdrawals over hours while the brothers take turns guarding the terrified captives, repeated sexual assaults against multiple victims in the living room while forcing others to watch or listen from adjacent rooms, theft of property, including vehicles and jewelry, forcing victims into a car trunk, driving them to a snow-covered soccer field, forcing them to kneel, execution-style shootings to the backs of their heads, running over the bodies with a car to ensure death, the gratuitous killing of a small dog named Nicky, apparently to terrorize the captives earlier in the night, The pattern is degradation punctuated by gunfire. The brothers seem to enjoy the power, the control, the suffering they inflict. The most disturbing element is the duration and the forcing of victims to perform sexual acts with each other under threat. Assaults that lasted hours while the brothers took turns and joked. Evasion fails because evidence piles up faster than fear can smother it, and because one victim survives against all odds. The survivor, shot in the head, naked in freezing temperatures, runs more than a mile through snow to reach help. Her testimony becomes the backbone of the prosecution. Investigators use ATM surveillance footage showing victims being forced to withdraw cash with captors visible, DNA analysis linking both brothers to multiple sexual assaults, ballistics matching shell casings from the field to weapons recovered, and the survivors' identifications. Arrests follow swiftly within days on December 22, 2000, after a traffic stop. The brothers show no public contrition, smirking in court appearances, taunting victims' families. Trial in October 2002 results in capital murder convictions on multiple counts for both brothers, guilty of capital murder, rape, aggravated robbery. Years of appellate litigation reach the Kansas Supreme Court, which vacates the death sentences in July 2014 on procedural grounds related to jury selection and failure to separate trials. The U.S. Supreme Court accepts the case. In January 2016, in an 8-1 decision, the Supreme Court reverses the Kansas court and reinstates the death sentences, finding that the brothers were not entitled to separate trials and that constitutional rights were not violated. As of November 2025, both Reginald Dexter Carr Jr. and Jonathan Dean Carr remain on death row at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas. Further appeals continue, but legal options narrow with each denial. The case reaffirms principles about due process, about how even the most horrific crimes must be tried fairly, but also that facts, when overwhelming, have weight that procedure cannot erase. Was this pathology inherited or learned? Opportunism or sadism? The distinction is thin when the outcome is 5 dead and families shattered. The courtroom empties. We move from a frozen field to a split-level house in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, where 2 teenagers decide that the first step to notoriety is to kill the people who named them, who fed them, who trusted them.
Afternoon, Robert Bever entered a guilty plea during his arraignment. A statement to the court, he said he and his younger brother Michael acted together in the murder of his parents, and he was taking...
A 911 dispatcher hears a whisper barely audible over labored breathing. "My brothers!" The caller is a 13-year-old girl, bleeding from 19 stab wounds, hiding in a neighbor's yard. Officers push through the door of 709 Magnolia Court and freeze at what they see. The victims are parents and siblings scattered through rooms. The perpetrators are sons and brothers. Blood on walls, floors, doorways. The plan, detectives will say after recovering notebooks and digital evidence, was to keep going. To a shopping mall, to a public place, to make the body count higher, to become famous like the killers they studied online. Robert Davis Bever and Michael John Bever have little public persona before July 22, 2015. They are homeschooled, largely unseen by the community, isolated by parental control. Privately, they are building a plan for fame through blood, documenting their fantasies in journals and internet searches. Scope is concentrated and familial. 5 family members killed in a single night. 1 sister survives with critical wounds after extraordinary courage. A 2-year-old sibling is found unharmed, hidden under a bed by a dying sister's quick thinking. They are notorious because they are juveniles by law, 18 and 16, when they commit acts that demonstrate adult planning and callousness with chilling calm. They are born in 1996 and 1998 in Oklahoma. Accounts describe strict religious parenting with extreme isolation, no public school, limited outside contact, rigid rules. Early signs live online where parents do not look. Obsession with mass shootings studied like case studies, discussions of body counts and methods, orders for knives and tactical equipment delivered to the house, YouTube searches for murder techniques and how to avoid capture. The path ends in a hallway lined with family photographs. The formative moment is the point where fantasy crosses into lists, purchases, and disposal plans written in notebooks police will later recover. Detailed instructions on how to kill family members one by one, plans to store bodies, strategies for the next phase at a public location. The crimes occur over approximately 30 minutes on the night of July 22, 2015. Confirmed victim count, 5. The victims are their parents, David Bever, age 52, and April Bever, age 44, and their siblings Daniel, age 12, Christopher, age 7, and Victoria, age 5. Method: multiple knives in a nighttime attack while most family members sleep or relax. Lures and ambushes down corridors. Systematic room-to-room progression. One sister, age 13 at the time, is attacked but survives despite 19 stab wounds by playing dead and then escaping to call 911. Another sibling, Crystal, age 2, is found alive in a closet where the older sister hid her while bleeding. Pattern: cold premeditation stamped onto family space. This is not rage exploding, but plans executed. The most disturbing aspect is the absence of hot anger or emotional breakdown. It is methodical, practiced in their minds, efficient in execution. The brothers had detailed plans to continue to Woodland Hills Mall or another public location, but are interrupted when police arrive faster than expected. Evasion fails when police arrive during the final moments of the attack, alerted by the surviving siblings' 911 call and neighbors who hear screaming. The investigation is swift and damning. On-scene arrests with blood still wet on clothing. Survivor identification immediate and certain. Digital evidence including extensive internet search histories, mass killers, how to kill, famous murderers, notebook plans describing each family member and how to kill them, and orders for weapons and body armor traced to their accounts. In July 2016, Robert Davis Bever pleads guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill, receiving 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole plus additional terms. The plea avoids death penalty consideration. In August 2018, a jury convicts Michael John Beaver of 5 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of assault with intent to kill after he rejects plea offers. He receives 5 life sentences with all but 1 to run concurrently, making him technically eligible for parole after serving many decades, though practically unlikely given the nature of the crimes. As of November 2025, both remain incarcerated in Oklahoma prisons. The family home at 709 Magnolia Court is demolished by the city in March 2017 and replaced with Reflection Park, a memorial green space. A public decision to rewrite the geography of grief and erase the address from GPS systems. Is notoriety a drug some minds metabolize too well? If the algorithm in their heads needed a trigger to transform fantasy into action, it was each other. Robert the instigator, Michael the follower, each making the other's worst impulses real. The next story is older, more rural and blunt. Twins and the bodies left behind in fields that kept secrets until investigators learned to look.
But nobody was speaking facts on this one. Probably police in January of 2069. He is eligible for parole, but he's already been denied.
A field burns in rural Tennessee, smoke visible for miles. Witnesses talk about 2 brothers who know how to make fear work like currency, who collect debts in pain. The cases are scattered across years, but the names recur in prosecutor files and witness statements: Hugh Peter, Pete Bondurant, and Kenneth Pat Bondurant. Prosecutors will connect them to killings in 1986. Gwen Duggar, a 24-year-old woman whose dismembered and burned remains are found in a remote area, and Terry Lynn Clark, whose body is discovered disposed of in similar fashion. A third case involves the death of Ronnie Gaines, whose connection to the twins is documented in testimony. Their public faces in Giles County are local toughness, men known in bars, in corners, in whispers. The private reality is violence and concealment backed by rural isolation and a reputation that keeps mouths shut. Scope is regional. Confirmed convictions arise in the early 1990s after lengthy investigations that require patience and courage from witnesses. They are notorious in Giles County, Tennessee, and surrounding areas where they move like weather patterns, predictable in their unpredictability, feared but not stopped for years because who would testify? The twins are born in 1955 in Tennessee. The childhood record is sparse in court opinions and news archives, poor, rural, hardscrabble upbringing. Early signs documented in juvenile and adult records include bar fights, intimidation of rivals, weapons charges, and reputations for explosive and unpredictable violence. The path to murder is less a sudden leap than a long walk through assaults that escalate in severity without consequence. The formative moment is likely a disappearance that becomes a homicide, then another, the pattern forming after the fact when bodies are finally discovered years later and connections drawn. Years active for the core killings, primarily 1986, though investigations suggest the timeline may be longer. Method includes beating, strangulation, and in the case of Gwen Duggar, dismemberment and burning to dispose of remains in ways that investigators will describe as attempting to make identification impossible. Her body is found in pieces, burned, scattered. The pattern includes mutual aid that makes prosecution complex. One brother assists the other with body disposal, intimidation of potential witnesses who might talk, and creating alibis. The most disturbing aspect is post-mortem desecration and the calculated, almost business-like effort to erase victims from existence to make them vanish so completely that families never get closure. Evasion relies on rural isolation, where bodies can lie undiscovered for extended periods. Witness fear in tight communities where everyone knows everyone, and the difficulty of connecting scattered remains to missing persons reports filed in different jurisdictions. Investigators build the case through witness statements from those who finally overcome fear. Often, years after events, searches of property that yield remains and physical evidence, and forensic work painstakingly assembling fragments into prosecutable cases. Arrests follow in the late 1980s after pressure mounts. Trials in the early 1990s produce convictions. Pat Bondurant receives life sentences for murder. Pete Bondurant is convicted and sentenced to lengthy terms, though records show complex procedural histories, with certain convictions later modified or overturned on technical grounds in appellate courts while other convictions stand. As of available public records through 2016, Pete Bondurant had been released on certain sentences while Pat remains incarcerated serving life. Their legacy is a local lesson in how rural isolation enables violence, how reputations can be weapons, and how distance from a courthouse does not make a body harder to count, only harder to find and identify. Does blood loyalty make it easier to say yes to horror when a twin asks? This time the answer is quiet, practiced, and hidden in fields. The next case returns to Florida, where two boys pick up a bat, set a fire, and change what family means in ways that raise more questions than answers.
In the Circuit Court in and for Escambia County, Florida, State of Florida plaintiff versus Derek King defendant. Case.
Smoke curls from a modest house in Cantonment, Florida, visible in the early morning darkness of November 26, 2001. Inside at 6040 Scenic Highway, 40-year-old Terry King is dead on a living room recliner, his skull fractured by repeated blows from an aluminum baseball bat. His sons, Derek and Alex King, ages 13 and 12, are missing. They will be found hours later at the home of an adult acquaintance named Ricky Chavis, age 40. In interviews over coming days, stories will tilt and collide and shift. Who swung the bat? Who lit the fire? Who planned it? Who was manipulated? Then end in pleas that leave more questions than answers, and a legal spectacle that overshadows the tragedy. Public persona, troubled preteens, runaways from a chaotic and allegedly abusive home, private reality, a volatile family environment, allegations of neglect, and an adult influence offstage that prosecutors will call grooming and manipulation. Scope is one victim in one night. The case is notorious for a legal entanglement in which the boys and Chavez are all at different times prosecuted for the same murder under different theories, creating a procedural spectacle that includes separate trials, conflicting testimony, and unprecedented legal maneuvering. Derek is born in 1988, Alex in 1989, to Terry King and his wife, who divorces him. The family history includes instability, custody battles, allegations of neglect by Terry King, and frequent conflict. Early warning signs are behavioral. The runaways become more frequent. The boys gravitate toward Chavez, whom they meet through family connections, and an attachment forms that alarms investigators after the murder. The path to the crime runs through that relationship. The formative moment is, according to prosecutors, not an explosion of rage, but a recruitment or manipulation, though defense attorneys will counter with stories of abuse at home, creating desperation. Did Chavez encourage the killing, or did the boys act alone and then seek refuge with the one adult who showed them attention? The crime is a single event on the night of November 26, 2001. Confirmed victim count, 1. Method: an aluminum baseball bat used to bludgeon Terry King as he reclined in the living room, multiple blows causing skull fractures and death, then arson using gasoline to set fire to the recliner and room in what investigators determine is an attempt to cover evidence of homicide by making it look like accidental fire. The boys flee immediately to Chavez's home nearby. The most disturbing aspect is age. Derek is 13, Alex is 12, children by any measure, committing an act that investigators say shows planning. Evasion is thin and brief. Police find the boys within hours at Chavez's home and begin interrogations that will be challenged later as potentially coercive given the boys' ages. Investigators record confessions and recantations. Initially, the boys confess to killing their father. Then later, they recant and suggest Chavez was involved or present. Forensic evidence includes the bat recovered near the scene, fire investigation reports establishing arson, and autopsy findings confirming blunt force trauma as cause of death. Prosecutors go forward against both the boys and Chavez in separate tracks, creating a legal paradox. The boys say Chavez helped or encouraged them. Chavez says he wasn't there and knew nothing until after. All face murder charges. Trials begin in 2002. The boys are convicted initially of second-degree murder and sentenced as adults. Shocking sentences of 8 years for Derek, 7 for Alex. Chavez is tried separately and acquitted of murder charges, but later convicted on other charges related to his relationship with the boys. In a rare move, the boys' convictions are overturned on appeal due to issues with joint trials and jury instructions. Rather than retry, the state offers plea deals. The boys plead to reduce charges, third-degree murder and arson, in exchange for lighter sentences already approaching time served. Derek receives 8 years total, Alex receives 7 years total. Both are released by 2009 after serving their full sentences. The aftermath is quiet and private for years until tragedy strikes again. In 2024, Alex King dies of a drug overdose in Montana at age 34. Derek King's current status remains private, living outside public attention. The legacy is procedural and troubling. Questions about juvenile justice, adult influence, manipulation, coercion, and truth when children talk to police without adequate legal protection. Can a child choose murder alone? Or is the adult world, whether an abusive father or a manipulative friend, a net that tightens invisibly until violence seems like the only escape? The question sits there without comfort or clean answers. The last case returns to Knoxville, where two half-brothers draw a radius of horror around a single house that will never be forgotten, where names are spoken with reverence and others with revulsion.
In 20 Decision was made today in a motion to disqualify Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti from representing the state in Lamarcus Davidson's post-conviction petitions.
A judge stares down from the bench and speaks words that reporters will repeat for years. The most incredibly outrageous, cruel, and inhumane acts he has seen in decades on the bench. The photographs shown at sentencing hearings are so unbearable that even seasoned investigators request counseling after viewing them. In January 2007, Lamarcus Devil Davidson and Letalvis Darnell Cobbins, half-brothers who share a mother, abduct a young couple, Channon Gale Christian and Christopher Galen Newsom, during a carjacking in Knoxville, Tennessee. What follows over approximately 30 hours is captivity, repeated sexual assaults by multiple perpetrators, torture, and murder in a rental house that becomes synonymous with evil. The city and nation will not forget their names or the address on Chipman Street where it happened. Public persona, men with prior felonies, prison time, no gentling force in their lives. Private reality, a willingness to use extreme violence, to prolong suffering, to attempt to destroy evidence using bleach and chemicals and fire. Scope, 2 victims, multiple co-defendants, including Davidson's brother and a female accomplice, 1 rental house at 23 and 16 Chipman Street that becomes a crime scene more than a house. They are notorious because the cruelty exceeds ordinary criminal vocabulary and because the prosecution survives a judge misconduct scandal unrelated to the facts of guilt, but significant enough to require retrials that test the system. Lamarcus Davidson is born in 1982, Letalvis Cobbins in 1982, half-brothers who grow up in rough circumstances. Early signs documented in criminal records include robbery, weapons charges, carjacking, and prison sentences that teach nothing. The path to the crimes is an opportunistic carjacking on the night of January 6, 2007, at an apartment complex where Channon and Christopher are visiting friends. That escalates the moment the perpetrators decide to bring the victims back to the Chipman Street house rather than simply take the vehicle and let them go. The formative act is the decision to captivate rather than release. From there is little left to imagine and much that should not be detailed beyond what is necessary for understanding the scope of depravity. The crimes occur between the night of January 6th and the early morning hours of January 8th, 2007. Confirmed victims, 2. Christopher Newsom, age 23, is raped, bound, shot multiple times in the neck, back, head, and body, and his body set on fire near railroad tracks while he may still have been alive. His death a combination of gunshot wounds and burning. Channon Christian, age 21, is held captive for longer. Investigators believe up to 2 days, subjected to repeated sexual assaults by multiple perpetrators over many hours, beaten severely, and ultimately suffocated or died from the combination of trauma. Her body is placed in a residential trash bin with bleach and other chemicals poured over it in an apparent attempt to destroy DNA evidence. Method is a sequence: abduction at gunpoint, captivity in the Chipman Street house, sexual assault by multiple perpetrators, including Davidson, Cobbins, and others, torture that includes beatings and degradation. Murder, attempts to destroy forensic evidence using bleach, cleaning chemicals, and fire. The most disturbing aspect is the duration of suffering. Channon alive and aware for up to 2 days, and the deliberate cleanup showing consciousness of guilt and planning. Evasion fails when cell phones ping locations, co-defendants talk under interrogation seeking deals, and forensics speak louder than bleach or fire can silence. Investigators assemble overwhelming and damning physical evidence, semen from multiple perpetrators linked through DNA analysis, fingerprints throughout the house, fibers matching victims' clothing, bleach traces throughout, the victim's property recovered from the house and from pawn shops where stolen items were sold, cell phone records placing defendants and victims together, and witness statements from neighbors and accomplices. Arrests come quickly in mid-January 2007, some in Knoxville, others tracked across state lines to Kentucky. Trials unfold from 2009 to 2010 with extensive media coverage. Lamarcus Davidson receives death sentence. Letalvis Cobbins receives life without parole. George Thomas, Davidson's brother, receives life. Vanessa Coleman, a female accomplice, receives lesser sentence for facilitation. Later, in a shocking development, the presiding judge Richard Baumgartner is removed from the bench and disbarred after evidence emerges of his drug addiction and misconduct during the trials, prescription drug abuse, inappropriate relationships, prompting appellate courts to order retrials or resentencing hearings. Retrials and resentencing hearings occur from 2012 to 2014. The convictions are upheld with procedural corrections. Core findings of guilt remain intact based on overwhelming evidence. As of November 2025, Lamarcus Davidson remains on death row in Tennessee awaiting execution. Letalvis Cobbins remains incarcerated at Morgan County Correctional Complex serving life without parole. Other co-defendants remain incarcerated serving their sentences. The legacy includes extensive case law about judicial misconduct and retrials, trauma that lingers in Knoxville where the Christian and Newsom families became advocates for victims' rights, and a case that becomes a touchstone in discussions about crime, race, media coverage, and justice. What makes some brothers extend a hand to pull each other out of a hole while others nudge each other further in, deeper into darkness, until light becomes a memory? The line looks thin on paper until you stand on it, until you face the choice between saying no and walking away versus saying yes and becoming a monster. These brothers chose. Their victims had no choice. The screen fades to black, then fills with names that deserve to be remembered while the perpetrators deserve to be forgotten. This series of cases shows a single pattern dressed in different clothes across decades and borders. Siblings share biography, genetics, environment. They also share access to parents who trust, to homes with unlocked doors, to alibis that hold, because who suspects brothers acting together? They did not choose the story. It folded around them like a trap sprung without warning. We leave with them, and with the families who carry their absence every single day, parents who bury children, children who grow up without parents, siblings who survive with guilt, partners who face empty beds, friends who replay last conversations looking for warnings that weren't there. We leave with them because they are the story that matters, not the brothers who killed them. The camera turns off, the lights come up, the tape stops. What remains is a question older than Cain and Abel, older than recorded history, as old as siblings and choice. When blood becomes betrayal, when the person who shares your DNA becomes your destroyer, when the brother or sister you grew up with transforms into your executioner, what does that say about the nature of evil? These 10 cases teach us hard lessons. Monsters are not always strangers in the dark. Sometimes they sit across the breakfast table. Sometimes they share your last name, your childhood bedroom, your parents. Sometimes they are the person you trusted most in the world, the person who knew your secrets and fears, the person who was supposed to protect you. And that perhaps is the most terrifying truth of all, that evil can grow in familiar soil, that cruelty can flourish between people who share blood, that the worst betrayals come from those closest to us. If you found this exploration into these shocking cases compelling, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Which of these killers do you think was the most disturbing? Share your thoughts in the comments below.